Unbeknownst to Caroline, just a few blocks away, her ex-husband Thomas Whitman sat in a cramped apartment, a shadow of the man she once knew. His fall from grace had been slow and insidious, each failure chipping away at the life he thought he deserved. After leaving Caroline, Thomas poured everything into his career, believing wealth and status would fill the void. But his reckless investments and indulgent lifestyle, fueled by his relationship with Carla, a woman who valued his wallet more than his heart, had drained his finances. Thomas lived alone, working a meager job at a failing brokerage firm. His dreams of grandeur had dissolved, replaced by a haunting regret that lingered in every corner of his sparse apartment. His children, once the anchors of his life, were now strangers. He hadn't seen or spoken to them in years, so he was too ashamed to reach out. One brisk November evening, Caroline was having dinner with Ethan at Vella's, an upscale restaurant in the heart of downtown. They had made it a tradition to celebrate milestones here, and tonight was no different. Ethan had just closed a significant deal for his firm to fund renewable energy projects in underprivileged communities, a cause close to their hearts. Caroline beamed with pride as Ethan recounted the negotiations. "You've done something incredible," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "Your work is changing lives." "Yours taught me how," Ethan replied, his smile softening. "You've always shown me what it means to lead with purpose." As they talked, sharing laughter and plans for the future, Caroline caught a glimpse of someone familiar out of the corner of her eye. Her breath hitched as she turned her head slightly. There, at a corner table, sat Thomas. He looked older, his hair entirely gray and thinning, his once confident posture slouched. He was alone, nursing a drink and staring at an untouched plate of food. For a moment, Caroline felt a pang of something. Pity, perhaps, or sorrow for what could have been. "Mom?" Ethan's voice brought her back. He followed her gaze and froze. His expression darkened as recognition dawned. "That's him, isn't it?" Ethan asked, his tone neutral but charged with an undercurrent of emotion. Caroline nodded.
"Yes."
Ethan set down his fork, his eyes fixed on Thomas. "I need to say something," he said, rising from his seat. "Ethan," Caroline began, her voice soft but firm.
"Think carefully."
Ethan hesitated momentarily, then looked at her with a resolve she recognized. "I have to do this." Caroline nodded, knowing she couldn't stop him. As Ethan approached Thomas's table, the restaurant seemed to quiet around them. Thomas looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief as his eldest son stood before him. "Ethan," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "Is it you?" Ethan didn't sit. He stood tall, his presence commanding. "It's me, your son, the one you walked away from." Thomas's face crumpled, his hands shaking as he gripped the table's edge. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." Ethan's expression hardened. "You're right, I didn't. But I'm here anyway." The weight of years hung heavy between them as Ethan continued. "Do you even know what you missed? Birthdays, graduations, the nights Mom stayed up worrying about how she'd pay the bills, the times we needed a father, and you weren't there." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to tell you this. We made it without you. Mom raised us to be strong, and she did it alone. We don't need you." With that, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving Thomas stunned. Back at their table, Ethan sat down, his jaw clenched. Caroline reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I'm proud of you," she said gently, "but don't let his choices weigh on you any longer. You've built a life he never could." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "I know, Mom,
"But it still hurts."
Caroline squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the pain Thomas had left behind. "It's okay to feel that way. Just don't let it define you." As they left the restaurant that night, Caroline glanced back again. Thomas remained at his table, staring down at his drink. For the first time in years, she felt not anger but a quiet sense of closure. She had built a life of strength and purpose that didn't need his approval or presence. Thomas Whitman sat at the small table in Vella's, the dim lighting casting shadows on his face. The echoes of his son's words reverberated in his mind, louder than the restaurant chatter or the clinking of silverware around him. "We made it without you." The statement was devastating in its simplicity. Ethan hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lashed out in anger. His calm, composed demeanor made the truth even more challenging to bear. Thomas had always imagined his children as extensions of himself, dependent on his success. Yet here was Ethan, a man now, standing tall, accomplished, and utterly indifferent to him. Thomas's hands trembled as he reached for his drink, the ice clinking softly in the glass. He had prepared for loneliness, thinking it was the price of his ambition. He hadn't prepared for irrelevance, the realization that his family had moved on without him and thrived in his absence. He thought back to the moment he had walked out on them. At the time, it had felt like freedom, a chance to chase the wealth and prestige he believed he deserved. With her fiery ambition and insatiable appetite for luxury, Carla had made him feel alive in a way Caroline's quiet resilience never did. But that life had been as hollow as the promises he had made to himself. Carla had left years ago, taking what little remained of his dwindling fortune. His once thriving brokerage firm had collapsed under the weight of bad investments and lavish spending. Friends who had praised his success disappeared as soon as the money did. Now, he was nothing more than a man in a shabby apartment with a past he couldn't rewrite. Thomas closed his eyes, the image of Caroline's face flashing. She had been seated at the table with Ethan, her smile radiant, her presence commanding. The years had been kind to her in a way they hadn't been to him. She had rebuilt her life, creating something strong and enduring, while he had torn his down brick by brick. He wondered how different things might have been if he had stayed. What would Ethan have become with his guidance? Would Claire have looked to him for advice? Would Lucas have remembered him as more than a shadow? A waiter approached, asking if Thomas wanted another drink. He shook his head and waved the man away. For the first time in years, alcohol couldn't dull the ache inside him. This wasn't something he could drink away. That night, Thomas returned to his cramped apartment and stood by the window, staring at the glowing Cincinnati skyline. The city had once been his playground, where he felt powerful and unstoppable. Now, it loomed over him like a monument to his failures. He picked up the phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Caroline's number. He hadn't dialed it in years, and his finger hovered over the screen. What could he say? Sorry, it won't be enough. Nothing would be enough. His hand fell to his side, and the phone slipped onto the table. For the first time, Thomas faced the full weight of his regret. He had always believed there would be time to fix things, time to explain, time to rebuild. But time had marched on without him, and he was left with nothing but memories of what could have been. Claire nodded, her voice quieter. I don't know if I want to forgive him. He doesn't feel like our dad. He feels like a stranger. That's okay, Caroline assured her. Forgiveness isn't something you do for him. It's something you do for yourself when you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay too. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. He missed everything. Birthdays, graduations, moments that mattered. And he can't get that back. But I don't want to carry this anger forever. It's exhausting. Caroline reached out, placing her hand over his. Then let it go. Not for him, but for you. You've built a life that speaks for itself. You don't need anything from him to keep moving forward. The room fell into reflective silence. The family was united by their shared experiences and strength. Despite the wounds Thomas had left, they had become something extraordinary together. 2 months after the encounter at Vella's, life in the Whitman family had settled into a steady rhythm. Caroline's consulting firm was expanding, with new clients reaching out for her expertise in navigating the complexities of nonprofit management. Her team had grown, allowing her to take on a mentorship role for younger professionals, which she found deeply fulfilling. Inspired by his mother's journey, Ethan began exploring ways to combine his career in finance with his passion for social impact. He proposed a new initiative for his firm, focusing on ethical investing in community-driven projects. The proposal was met with enthusiasm, and Ethan became the youngest department head in the company's history. Claire, in her second year of graduate school, was thriving academically. She had started volunteering at a community mental health center, helping individuals navigate the challenges of trauma and loss. experiences she understood intimately. Her professors often praised her empathy and dedication, which Caroline knew came from their family's trials. Lucas, now in his final year of high school, was preparing to leave for college. Accepted into a prestigious engineering program, he was eager to explore his love of technology and innovation. At home, he still had a quiet maturity beyond his years, a testament to the lessons he had absorbed from his mother and siblings. The family gathered at Caroline's house for brunch on a crisp Saturday morning. The dining room, filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and the hum of conversation, was a scene of warmth and connection. As they ate, they reflected on how far they had come. "I've been thinking about writing our story," Claire said suddenly, hesitant but hopeful. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Our story?" Claire nodded. "What we went through after Dad left. How you rebuilt everything."
I think it could help people.
Ethan smiled. "I think that's a great idea. Mom, you've been the backbone of this family. Your story deserves to be told." Caroline hesitated, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. "It's not just my story," she said softly. "It's ours. We made it through together." On a snowy evening in February, Caroline received an unexpected letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Thomas. She opened it carefully, her emotions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The letter was short but heartfelt. "Caroline, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you. Thank you for being the parent I couldn't be. Thank you for raising our children into extraordinary people. I see them from afar and am awed by what they've become. That's because of you. I'll carry the weight of my choices for the rest of my life, but knowing they've thrived gives me peace. Thomas, ****. Caroline folded the letter and set it aside. She didn't feel the need to respond. Thomas's words didn't change the past, nor did they erase the pain he had caused. But they confirmed what she already knew, that she and her children had created a life of strength and purpose that didn't depend on his validation. Caroline was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference that spring. Standing on the stage, she shared her journey, from when she found Thomas's letter to the life she had built in the years since. She spoke of resilience, the power of community, and the importance of believing in oneself even in the darkest moments. Her closing words lingered in the air, resonating with the audience. Life doesn't always go as planned, but when we face adversity, we discover the strength we didn't know we had. And sometimes, the hardest chapters lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Ethan, Claire, and Lucas sat side by side in the audience, their faces glowing with pride. For them, Caroline wasn't just a mother. She was a symbol of unwavering determination and love. As they left the conference together, the fresh spring air filled with promise, Caroline looked at her children, now young adults ready to forge their paths. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing the family she had fought to hold together was stronger than ever. The past no longer held power over her. The future was hers to shape alongside the remarkable children who had grown with her every step of the way. Caroline smiled as they walked into the sunlight, a quiet but undeniable truth settling in her heart. They had survived and thrived. Caroline drove home silently, her hands gripping the steering wheel as the streetlights cast shifting patterns across the car's interior. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, quiet but visibly tense. She glanced at him briefly, her heart aching for the emotions she knew he was wrestling with. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, though his jaw was tight. "Yeah, I didn't think seeing him would feel like that." "Like what?" Caroline prompted, her voice gentle. "Empty," Ethan admitted. "I thought confronting him would give me closure, but it just made me feel sad." Caroline sighed, understanding precisely what he meant. For years after Thomas left, she had dreamed of a moment like this, seeing him, showing him how strong she had become, and how perfectly children had thrived. But hunched and broken when she saw him at the restaurant, the satisfaction she had imagined wasn't there. Instead, she had felt pity, not for the man Thomas had become, but for the man he could have been, the father he had failed to be, the partner he had chosen not to be. "I used to think closure came from confronting the past," Caroline said, keeping her eyes on the road. "But I've learned it doesn't. It comes from within, from deciding that the past doesn't define you. Ethan leaned back in his seat, his expression softening. Do you think he regrets it? Leaving us, I mean. Caroline didn't answer immediately. She thought of Thomas's face when he saw Ethan, how his hands shook, the look of sorrow in his eyes. I think he does, she said finally. But regret doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo his choices or the consequences we had to live with. When they arrived home, Caroline hugged Ethan tightly before he went to his room. She stood in the quiet of the living room, the memories of the evening swirling in her mind. Her gaze drifted to the family photos on the wall, Ethan's college graduation, Claire's first recital, and Lucas's soccer championship. These were the moments Thomas had missed, the moments she had fought to protect and create. Later, as she sat in her office, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her workspace, Caroline picked up her phone. She scrolled to Thomas's name in her contacts, a name she hadn't deleted despite everything. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but didn't press it. Instead, she opened a new message and began typing. Thomas, I don't know if this will mean anything to you, but I want you to know we're okay. The kids are thriving. They've built lives you would be proud of. And so have I. I hope you find peace in your life, wherever it takes you. She hesitated for a moment, then hit send. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't an invitation. It was a statement of fact, a way to release the last vestiges of bitterness she had carried. As Caroline set the phone down, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The past, with all its pain and struggle, no longer had a hold on her. Her life was hers now, and she was determined to live it fully. The morning after sending the message to Thomas, Caroline woke with a surprising sense of peace. For years, the anger and betrayal she had carried felt like a shield, a necessary armor to protect herself and her children. But now, that shield seemed unnecessary. She had said what she needed to say to Thomas and herself. There was no unfinished business, no lingering need for acknowledgement or apology. Her consulting firm was thriving, and her life was entire. Caroline had built a network of colleagues who admired her work and a community of friends who supported her. Linda, her steadfast neighbor and friend, had been instrumental in helping her navigate the most challenging years. Over coffee that morning, Caroline shared the events of the previous evening. So, you saw him? Linda asked, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. I did, Caroline replied, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. And Ethan confronted him. Linda nodded slowly, her brow furrowing. How do you feel about that? Caroline paused, considering her words. I think Ethan needed it, even if it didn't give him the closure he sought. And as for me, I feel lighter. Like I've finally let go of something I didn't realize I was still holding on to. Linda smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. You've done more than let go, Caroline. You've built a whole new life. And that's something no one, not even Thomas, can take away from you. Caroline nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Linda had seen her at her lowest and now shared in the quiet triumph of her transformation. That afternoon, Caroline returned to her office, where a large bouquet of sunflowers sat on her desk. She smiled, knowing they were from Ethan, a thank you for her unwavering support. Attached is a note. Mom, thank you for showing us what strength looks like. You've given us everything, and we're better because of you. Love, Ethan. This welled in Caroline's eyes as she read the words. It wasn't just her professional success that defined her. It was the family she had nurtured and the relationships she had built with her children. They were her legacy, a testament to her resilience and love. Across the city, Thomas sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at Caroline's message on his phone. He read it repeatedly, each word a bittersweet reminder of what he had lost. The fact that Caroline had reached out at all surprised him. Even without forgiveness, the warmth of her words stung more than any silence ever could. For hours, he debated his next move. Should he respond? Should he call? What could he possibly say? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his apartment, Thomas finally made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed Ethan's number. The line rang several times before going to voicemail, but Thomas wasn't deterred. He left a message, his voice shaking with emotion. Ethan, It's Dad. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to say something. I'm proud of you, of the man you've become, and I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for not being there. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you know I think about you, Claire and Lucas daily. Take care of your mom. She's an incredible woman. Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and despair when he hung up. He knew there was little chance Ethan would return the call, but he had said what he needed to say. For the first time in years, he had acknowledged his failure, not just to himself, but to the people he had wronged. That evening, Ethan listened to the voicemail with a tightness in his chest. He replayed it twice, his father's trembling voice stirring emotions he didn't want to feel. Part of him wanted to delete it, to erase any trace of the man who had caused so much pain. But another part, shaped by his mother's example of strength and compassion, hesitated. Ethan didn't call back. Instead, he shared the voicemail with Caroline and his siblings during their next family dinner. Claire listened with a furrowed brow, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of her glass. Lucas, now a thoughtful and articulate teenager, spoke first. "Do you think he's sorry?" Lucas asked, his voice steady but uncertain. Caroline's gaze softened as she looked at her youngest. "I think he regrets what he's lost," she said carefully. "But regret isn't the same as taking responsibility." The soft hum of the city seemed to mock Caroline Whitman as she gazed out at the bustling streets below. It was a sharp contrast to the silence in her home, a once vibrant place now filled with only echoes of the past. Her marriage to Thomas Whitman had been a story of promises, love, security, and a shared future. But promises are fragile things, quickly shattered by ambition and self-interest. Thomas walked out the door 15 years ago, leaving Caroline with 3 young children and many unanswered questions. Now, Cincinnati was both a city of survival and scars for Caroline. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of the life she had worked tirelessly to rebuild after Thomas abandoned them. Yet, life has a way of throwing unexpected twists. One cold November day, Caroline spotted a familiar figure stepping out of a modest apartment building, a man whose face she hadn't seen in over a decade. It was Thomas, but he wasn't the confident, successful man who had left them behind. This man looked weary, weathered, and broken. What had brought him back? What could he possibly want now? Caroline's story is one of resilience, heartbreak, and the quiet strength of a mother determined to rise from the ashes. As we unravel her journey, you'll see how life can rebuild what others try to destroy, and how choices, no matter how long ago, come back to demand accountability. If you want to dive into powerful, emotional stories touching love, loss, and redemption, subscribe to our channel. Caroline's journey is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Caroline's days were once defined by a comforting rhythm, packing lunches, helping with homework, and waiting for her husband, Thomas, to come home. Their home in the quiet middle-class neighborhood of Westwood was supposed to be the heart of their family, a sanctuary filled with laughter and love. But as the years passed, Thomas grew more distant. His goodnight kisses became fleeting. His presence in the house felt like a shadow, intangible and cold. One morning, Caroline woke up to an unusual silence. The kids had already left for school, their giggles and chatter replaced by the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Thomas had left for work early, as he often did, without a word or glance in her direction. As Caroline moved through the kitchen, her eyes fell on a crisp white envelope on the counter. Her breath hitched. The paper felt heavy in her trembling hands. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding as she read the words written in Thomas's precise, emotionless handwriting. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. I've met someone who understands me better than you ever could." The letter continued, each word slicing through her like a blade. Thomas wasn't just leaving her. He was abandoning their children, too. Her mind reeled with questions. How could he walk away so easily? How could he leave their 3 children, Ethan, Claire, and Lucas, without a goodbye? Caroline dropped into a chair, the letter slipping from her hands onto the kitchen table. Tears streamed down her face as the reality of her situation sank in. Her thoughts turned to the children. Ethan, only 10, was already showing signs of being protective of his siblings. Claire, sweet and imaginative at 5, still believed in fairy tales. And Lucas, just 2 years old, would barely remember his father's face. She had to be strong for them, but where would she start? The man she had trusted and built her life around had left her with questions, heartache, and an uncertain future. A sharp knock on the door startled her. Caroline quickly wiped her tears and opened the door to see Linda Shaw, her neighbor and an unlikely source of comfort. Linda, a woman with a brisk demeanor and a heart of gold, took one look at Caroline's pale face and trembling hands. "Something's wrong," Linda said, her voice firm yet gentle. "You don't have to say anything now, but I'm here. Whatever it is, you're not going through it alone." Caroline nodded, unable to speak. Linda's presence, though brief, was a reminder that even in moments of despair, there could be glimmers of light. Caroline spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of her routine. She picked up the kids from school, plastering a smile as Ethan talked excitedly about his math project, Claire described a game from recess, and Lucas babbled about his favorite toy. She cooked dinner, though she couldn't taste the food, and tucked the children into bed, her heart breaking as Ethan hesitated at the door. "Mom," he whispered, his brown eyes wide with worry. "When's Dad coming home?" Caroline swallowed hard, forcing a calm tone. "I'm not sure, sweetheart, but everything's going to be okay." Ethan nodded slowly, but his frown lingered. Caroline could see the doubt in his eyes, the cracks in his trust. Claire and Lucas were too young to understand, but Ethan was perceptive. He could sense that something was wrong. After the children had fallen asleep, Caroline sat at the kitchen table, Thomas's letter lying in front of her like a cruel taunt. She read it over and over, hoping the words would change, that it would reveal some hidden meaning or remorse. But it didn't. It was just cold, detached, final. The phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. She snatched it up, her heart leaping irrationally with hope. Maybe Thomas had changed his mind. Perhaps he was calling to apologize. But the voice on the other end wasn't his. "Mrs. Whitman?" The tone was clipped and professional. "This is Melissa from Thomas's office. I'm calling on his behalf." Caroline's grip on the phone tightened. Melissa had always made her uneasy with her icy demeanor and subtle glances. "He wanted me to inform you that he won't be returning home," Melissa continued, her words cutting like glass. "He's arranged for financial support. You'll receive the first deposit by the end of the week." Caroline's chest tightened. Financial support? That was all their marriage and their family had boiled down to. A bank transfer? "I see," Caroline said, her voice brittle. "I'm sorry," Melissa added, though the apology sounded mechanical, insincere. Caroline hung up, her hand trembling. Alone in the silence, she felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her like a crashing wave. She had no job, savings, or idea of how to keep their lives afloat. But as the hours dragged on, another thought began to take root. This wasn't just about survival. This was about showing Thomas and herself that she could rebuild her life, not because of him, but despite him. The following day, Caroline woke early, her mind buzzing with determination. She dressed the children, packed their lunches, and sent them to school with hugs and smiles that masked her inner turmoil. As she watched their bus pull away, she knew the first step to reclaiming her life was clear. She needed a plan. Caroline sat down at the kitchen table with her old laptop, its screen flickering to life like a symbol of her hesitant hope. She began searching for jobs, each click of the mouse feeling like an act of defiance. The positions she found were humbling: receptionist roles, administrative work, part-time shifts at local shops, but she applied for everything. Her chest ached with anxiety as she typed out her applications, the weight of her past mistakes and sacrifices clawing at her resolve. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "You can do this." And she knew she had no other choice. The following weeks blurred into an exhausting routine for Caroline. Each day began with the same knot of anxiety tightening in her chest as she packed lunches for the children and sent them off to school. Once the house was silent, she would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the mounting pile of bills and wondering how she would keep the lights on. Her first attempt to access their joint bank account ended in a cruel shock. It was nearly empty. Thomas had left just enough to cover their immediate expenses for a few weeks, but not much more. The mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, all were slipping further out of reach. She hadn't told the children how dire the situation was, but its weight pressed on her like a heavy stone. Determined to find a solution, Caroline dove into job applications. Most of her experience was outdated. Her degree in social work now felt like a relic of a past life. She applied for anything and everything: receptionist positions, part-time roles at grocery stores, and even administrative jobs with local nonprofits. Each application felt like a small, fragile step toward stability, though the odds of success seemed slim. It wasn't just about the money, though the lack of it was terrifying. It was about proving to herself and Thomas in absentia that she could rebuild her life without him. Late at night, as the children slept upstairs, Caroline would sit at the table, her laptop glowing faintly in the dim kitchen, and scour job boards until her eyes burned. The nights were the hardest. The full weight of her new reality pressed down on her when the house was silent. She felt the loneliness of the house echoing back at her, the ghost of the family she had once believed unbreakable haunting every corner. Her only respite came from Linda, her neighbor, who checked in regularly. Linda's tough love approach was both comforting and galvanizing. "You're stronger than you think, Caroline," Linda said one evening, dropping off a casserole when she saw Caroline's pale, weary face. "You just don't know it yet." Caroline nodded silently, her throat too tight to respond. But Linda's words planted a seed, a tiny ember of determination she clung to during the long, lonely hours. 2 weeks later, Caroline finally got a call back. It wasn't her first choice, or her second or third, but the offer to work as an administrative assistant at a small nonprofit downtown felt like a lifeline. The pay was modest, and the hours were long, but it was a start. Her first day on the job was daunting. The office buzzed with activity, and Caroline felt out of place among the younger staff, who seemed to navigate the fast-paced environment effortlessly. But she threw herself into the work, determined to prove her worth. She stayed late to organize files, took on tasks that weren't hers, and made an effort to connect with her coworkers. Slowly, she began to find her rhythm. At home, Caroline's newfound purpose began to trickle into her interactions with the children. She no longer had to fake smiles as much. The hope of a steady income gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt in weeks. The children, still adjusting to their father's absence, found solace in her steadiness. Ethan, her oldest, began to step into a more protective role, watching over his siblings with a maturity that broke Caroline's heart. "Don't worry, Mom," he said one evening as he helped her clear the dinner table. "We'll be okay." Caroline smiled at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, sweetheart, we will." But the road to stability was anything but smooth. Every week brought a new challenge: a car repair bill, a letter from the bank about the overdue mortgage, or a call from a creditor demanding payment. Caroline stretched every dollar, sacrificing her needs to ensure the children didn't feel the weight of their situation. Her friendship with Linda deepened during this time. One evening, as they shared coffee at Caroline's kitchen table, Linda offered advice that would change everything. "You're doing great, Caroline," Linda said, her voice firm. "But don't just survive. Start thinking about how to thrive. You're more capable than you give yourself credit for." The words stuck with her. That night, Caroline revisited an idea she had pushed aside for years: starting her own consulting business. When she worked in social services, she excelled at organizing community outreach programs and building connections. What if she could turn that into a career? Over the next few weeks, Caroline began laying the groundwork for her business. She stayed up late researching grant writing and community development, contacting old colleagues for advice and connections. The work was grueling, but for the first time in years, Caroline felt a spark of excitement. Her children noticed the change in her. "You've been smiling more," Claire said one evening as Caroline tucked her into bed. "Have I?" Caroline asked, her lips curving into another smile. Claire nodded. "It's nice. You should do it more." Caroline kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart swelling with gratitude. The challenges weren't over, not by a long shot, but she felt she was moving forward for the first time since Thomas had left. 15 years had passed since Caroline Whitman stood in her kitchen clutching the letter that changed her life. The house in Westwood, once a place of heartbreak, was long gone, replaced by a spacious home in a vibrant Cincinnati neighborhood. Her life now reflected a transformation she had built brick by brick, choice by choice. Caroline's consulting firm, Empower Pathways, had grown from a side hustle into a thriving business. She became a respected figure in Cincinnati's nonprofit and small business sectors, helping organizations secure funding, manage resources, and make lasting community impacts. Her work wasn't just about finances, but building futures like her own. The years hadn't erased the scars Thomas had left behind, but they had reshaped them. Caroline no longer defined herself by what she had lost. Instead, she saw herself as the architect of a new life where resilience and purpose replaced bitterness and regret. Her children had blossomed into remarkable young adults. Ethan, her eldest, now 25, had carved out a career in finance, focusing on ethical investing and community development, values he had inherited from his mother. Claire, at 20, was a psychology graduate student, determined to help others navigate the struggles she had witnessed growing up. And Lucas, now 17, was a tech-savvy high school senior with dreams of studying computer engineering. On a sunny fall morning, Caroline sat in her sleek, modern office, reviewing the quarterly report from a client, a community organization dedicated to affordable housing. She paused momentarily, gazing out at the bustling Cincinnati Tech District, a place she had come to love for its innovation and what it represented: growth, opportunity, and redemption.